the matter, Jojo? You're a pup man. Prepare to leave the house.
Today you boys will be involved in such activities as war games, the ambush techniques, the Blowingstoffer.
I don't think I can do this.
Was? Of course you can.
When I was your age, I had an imaginary friend. It got me in so much trouble.
Kids, it's time to burn some books.
You're growing up too fast. 10-year-olds shouldn't be celebrating war and talking politics.
Heil Hitler. I wish more of our young boys had your blind fanaticism.
Did you know Jews can read each other's minds? But how would you know if you saw one? They could look just like us. Hi. You know what I am? Say it. A Jew. Gesundheit.
Sheesh, that was intense.
What am I going to do?
No idea.
Got it! I will
Burn
negotiate.
down the house and blame Winston Churchill. Or negotiate.
If I tell on you, you'll be in big trouble.
They'll never win. Love is the strongest thing in the world.
Your mother took me in. She's kind. She treats me like a person.
You two seem to be getting on well.
She doesn't seem like a bad person. I'm the enemy. You're not a Nazi, Jojo. You're a 10-year-old kid who likes dressing up in a funny uniform and wants to be part of a club. You're here? Oh, God. Nothing makes sense anymore. Yeah, I know. It's definitely not a good time to be a Nazi.
In the Wild West world of podcasting, there is one podcast that is authentic and genuine and continues to stand tall in its originality. Based on a passion for his guests, their work, and his love of podcasting, Derek Thomas and Monday Morning Critic Podcast get amazing, diverse, unique guests found nowhere else. The variety and quality are endless. There is something for everyone. Derek Thomas is the hero you deserve. He's a silent guardian, a watchful protector. Welcome to Monday Morning Critic Podcast. Here is Derek Thomas.
Christine Leunens is a wonderful author whose 2008 Caging Skies was the nucleus of Jojo Rabbit. Very excited to have Christine on the podcast today. Christine, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Derek.
So off air, we started talking a little bit about Hartford, because this is, for those listening, where Christine was born. And obviously, many of you who have been listening to the podcast know I live in Western Massachusetts, about 30 minutes away. So how long were you in Hartford for, Christine, in your life?
So about 3.5 years. So I guess the very vital first years were there. And then we didn't go too far. We went then after to Massachusetts, so Springfield and West Springfield, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. So you went from Hartford to Springfield. And how long did you spend in Springfield, Christine?
Listen, I think I was 7 years old when then we went down to Florida. And then from Florida, I went to university. And then as a teenager, I went to Paris. So I went, in my younger years, I did go start, because my mother was Italian born, and my father was Belgian. And so as a teenager, I was just very interested to go back to Europe and discover the family there, the family in Belgium, the family in Italy.
Yes, and that makes a lot of sense. And let me ask you, so I want to get into your move in Paris in a second, and your education. You moved to Paris as a teenager, and I know that, and I hope I have this correct, you have a very close rapport and relationship with your grandfather. Is that correct, Christine?
Yes, that is. So he was he was living himself in Paris at the time. So he was Belgian born, but living in Paris since over 30 years when I was there. So it was quite exciting, because he was a painter and he did sculpture too. And we used to go to museums and we used to discuss, different art or poetry. And it was just very exciting to be there and discuss architecture. And in fact, he was the one who had told me I'm going to be a writer one day. And I didn't even believe it was true. And my one regret is he didn't live long enough to know that would be true, that he was right. But he said he could tell because I would write such long letters. And he said he could tell by the way I wrote the letters that was my way of expressing myself, was through writing. Which oddly enough, once I did become a writer, I stopped the letters because, you do so much writing per day. The last thing you want to do
is write a list.
To a letter, yeah. And people don't even do letters anymore. That era seems so far away now, writing letters and receiving them in your letterbox, today.
That's such a good point. Yeah, I can't remember the last time I've either sent or received a letter. That's a great point. Yeah, it seems like a lifetime ago, Christine.
I was trying to discuss this with my kids yesterday to just say how important it had been. It's hard to explain that, but when something was written by hand and you used to get that in your heart, used to pick up, even when you got a university acceptance or anything, or even back then a publication, your rejection letter or, the fact that they take you would come actually in an envelope. So you'd get, an envelope with whatever company was on there, and you knew that would be your yes or your no. So you'd sit there for a while before even opening it. And the emails today, people do write longer emails, but nothing compared, to the many page letters you used to write. Also because you didn't have to reply right away. So you would get, for example, your letter, and then you could wait in a few weeks, some Sunday when you'd have time, and you dedicate that Sunday afternoon to write the letters. So you also wrote to less people than you do today. Today, I have a feeling you write to many more people, but because of that, you write just shorter things, to everyone, just to keep in touch. So you keep more in touch, but you don't go quite as deeply into your feelings as the way you used to when you would do a personal letter to someone, and you'd be writing 3 times a year or something.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we talk about your life a little bit in the States. When you moved to Paris as a teenager, is that a little bit, I don't want to say culture shock, but is that a little bit of was that a tough adjustment for you? Was it an easy transition?
No, it was very, very difficult. First of all, I felt, and I still feel this to the day, everything in the U.S., especially after you've gone to France, I think I can say that seems to run very smoothly. If you call for some kind of service, usually the people, it's done when they say they do, or they mean to make it right. When I first went to Paris, it was just a little bit bizarre. You'd go into, let's say, the post office, which is a public, it's a public service. And then 5 or 10 minutes before it's really allowed to be closed, they just close the gate and say closed and walk off, So it was a huge culture shock. Also because I'm not saying they're not friendly French people. They certainly are very, very friendly French people. But I guess in Paris, I was going from places that were smaller and suddenly Paris. So, I was astonished that sometimes you'd be someplace shopping and you'd be standing there to ask a question and they could just, see you but not pay any attention. You'd be ignored. So there was some adjustment to do, to get used to that.
Yeah. And, and for those listening, your life has so many interesting facets even before we get into your work. You were a model, and you had a very very legitimate modeling career. I looked into it. It's an amazing career. And I know you at one point, I think you said this, that, it helped pay your way to your writing career. But I feel like there was more to it than that, Christine, right? Because to get to the level you're at is very difficult. So I feel like it's almost two things, right? You used it to help pave the way for your next step in life. But I also feel like it's a pretty impressive achievement in itself.
Well, I always felt what I loved the most about France was I love the kinds of arts and the thinkers and things. And a lot of the photographers I would work with it was all new to me. It was very intellectual. You'd go there and they'd have art on their wall or photography, black and white, and really, beautiful photography. And I remember that I did enjoy feeling like I was a little bit part of that as they were, because it was mostly high fashion I was doing. So the photographer, I would try to really work so that they could find what they were looking. If they were looking to do something geometrical, with that shot, I would try to help them, do some kind of some movement that's geometrical. Or you had to be very professional back then, and I think that paid a lot. Believe it or not, I even think that somehow being polite and thoughtful helped me a lot, because people used to tell me they would, put the clothes on me and dress me, and I would say thank you, and they would say to me, "You're the only person who ever says thank you." Or when I would go meet the people, I'd go and shake everyone's hand, because I didn't want to just go in there like I'm this person and I take myself so seriously. And I think that helped, because then when I would work with people, they'd want to work with me, again and again, because we'd have a nice trip together. Right. Sometimes when maybe a model was taken just, as a very young teenager, and then sometimes they didn't always... they took it too seriously, let's put it that way. I felt I couldn't take the modeling seriously. I always felt like it was play acting. But part of it for me too was that when I was younger, I had, I think I was a normal, perhaps chubby baby, and then as a young child, I probably looked normal, but then I grew way too tall, too fast. I was extremely thin, and then I had also the fact that when my adult teeth came in, they were so much, to the front that I couldn't even close my mouth. So, and my hair was cut short. So let's just put, I wasn't considered the person, if you were in PE class and you were selecting teams, I was usually the last person where I'd be praying, please someone take me, but I'd be the one that some team had to take while the other team burst out laughing. So to have gone in a relatively short amount of time, from being like that, within 5 years to suddenly being in a magazine and having, a change, I never took it seriously, because I felt I'm still the person I am, but I always felt the frustration. Can't people see who I really am on the inside? And I think that did push me to want to be a writer, almost to say it doesn't matter what you look like on the inside, it's how you express yourself, it's who you are on the inside that was so important to me. But the modeling was fun in that way, because I'd just go do that, and then after, take off the makeup, wash my hair, and get back into my normal clothes, and just feel like, I had been in the theater almost, and, played this game. But it didn't feel, that never felt like it was me. It felt like some kind of artistic fun I was having, dress up.
Yeah, and I never thought of it that way, because you're right. It's your appearance on the outside, it's what you're doing, and then it's and more importantly, the writing piece is what you are on the inside. Let me ask you. You mentioned not taking yourself too seriously. Is there anything, because the thank you and the politeness, I feel like that's who you are. That's who you always been. But is there anything you specifically took out of modeling? Something you learned, whether it's confidence or maybe something like you just mentioned, not taking yourself too seriously. Is there something you specifically learned from modeling that you carried over to writing, or am I looking for too much of a stretch here, Christine?
I'm trying to think. Maybe in my first novel, Primordial Soup, I poke a lot of fun, at the physical nature of things. So I definitely think I took that with me. I think what really marked me, and I think it's the society we live in, which sometimes I like to think of as the neo-Hellenistic age. In that, I believe there's far too much focus currently on people's physical appearance, and I think it makes people extremely unhappy. And because this has gone over to a kind of visual society on Facebook, people almost do this kind of advertisement of themselves where they feel they have to look good and always be happy. It's a little bit what I had to do when I had to do ads and things. But I at some point thought to myself, at the time where you think someone looks their so-called best, that would be from what? About your mid-teens, depending, if some did. I certainly didn't. I wasn't able to do that as a mid-teen. So let's say between 15 to 25, that would be 10 years. But for most people, maybe from 20 to 25 or 20 to 27. In any case, even if you would stretch 10 years, I find that's just such a small part of a human life.
Sure.
And somehow something's bizarre about the way we even think of this, because when you're a baby, you change a lot to a toddler, then to a child, and then a teenager. You're always changing physically. Then suddenly there's some part where people seem to think of as their peak. and then after, people to tend to think that they're going downhill. And I think it's a question of perception, and I think it's a very negative thing, because we spend most of our life, if you look at the amount of years, so between 30 and, let's say, we would hope 70, 80, 90, 100, that's a majority of a life, and people shouldn't be looking at themselves as if a wrinkle is an unattractive thing. This is just how people look, and if we would be more acceptance of that, like some societies are, and see actually the beauty of somebody who's had life experience and, depth to them, and, gathered some wisdom as they go on, I think we'd be much happier people, and we'd be much closer instead of always trying to hide behind this plastic facade. So that's what I think I found during my modeling. I said that through my writing, I would always try and express that feeling, because something really struck me as wrong, the whole glamorification of just youthfulness, and as if that's something, the peak and the happy time of the era, and it's all downhill. I absolutely reject that, and I feel much happier now that I'm much older than I am then, and I have my gray hair, but I feel happier now than I did at the time when I was young.
No, that's beautifully said, and I so agree with you, and I feel like now, I'm 47, I just had my first child. I've never been happier in my life. I'm more happy at almost 50, Christine, than I was any time before in my life, and what you're saying just rings so true, and I think you described Instagram, right? It's all surface and really no substance, right? It's just, there's no, it's a very judgmental kind of superficial thing, these aren't your words, these are mine, but I just feel like I so agree with what you say. It's like, you're right. I mean, everything has its own beauty. There's no one way, and it's, I just feel like your words, what you just said, just pretty much describes what Instagram is. It's just throwing a picture, beauty, this and that. There's nothing, there's no value. There's nothing there that shows what people are truly worth, Christine.
Yeah, what they're feeling and what their depth. And I tell even the children, and I tell my children's friends, because this kind of society that we live in tends to say you have value when you're young, so that young people even look at people who are older as it's frightening. One day I might be old. I say this is going to be the most beautiful years of, your life. First of all, you wouldn't even have children, if I were that young. So I have to be at this age and look like this to, be old enough to have children. That's the way nature is, meant to be. And I always say, go through that. These will be your, very beautiful, happy years that you're going towards. And don't go through that with fear.
And I have to say, Christine, when we were growing up, one of my friends' father used to always say, getting older is a privilege. And I would agree with what he said.
Yes.
By the way, you mentioned Primordial Soup. That was your 1999 release. I wanted to ask you about Harvard really quick. I went to Northeastern, by the way. We are indirectly connected here on a couple different levels. I didn't go to Harvard, though. But you have a Master of Liberal Arts in English, American Literature and Language from Harvard, and I want to say 2005. How big of a part of that, Christine, plays into your writing? How much did you learn at Harvard?
That was huge for me, to go back, because I had already published my first novel. Well, actually, when I started, I had written it, but I had gone back. It was when I finished my first term, I found out I was going to be published. But what I found was so helpful for me is I was studying literature, but I was going there having written my first novel. So for the first time, I wanted to study what other authors did and how they did it, but with a point of view of, of the craft, almost like someone who'd already, started to learn how to cut wood and things, and then was going to look at how other people did furniture. And that was extremely helpful. It was liberating because I found out there's actually no one way to do it. There's many ways to do it. And then it also gave me confidence to say, okay, it's been done so many different ways and so beautifully done. Just do it your way, because that's all really you can contribute, is you can do your very best to each story, which in itself, each story is different. And there's no one process I found, because, the way I would work for the first novel isn't necessarily the same I would for the second. But it did give me confidence to know that, many different things are there, and it's vast. And at the end, you just have to try to be the most faithful you can to yourself. And even though I love other authors very much, I wouldn't try to imitate those authors because, what they've done has already been done. So that helped me just to say, okay, well then who are you and what are your feelings and how can you be true and genuine to that?
That's really well said. I've had many authors on the podcast, and parts of your story remind me of, I had Lois Lowry on the podcast, who also wrote, she wrote a book about the Holocaust, Number of the Stars. She's had books made into movies very similar to your background. What do you struggle with most, Christine, as an author?
Probably because it takes me a long time. So I start, with an idea. I work it a lot. And then what I should do, and I keep telling myself this, and I've really done 4 novels now. My new one's coming out January, February.
Oh, exciting.
But each time it's exciting. But each time I do the same thing. I write the rough draft, then I do a first draft, and I always write more than what I need to write. So it's too long. I think this one I went up at some stage to almost 130,000 words, if not more. And I know it's got to be cut down. But what I should do is I should cut it down, and then I should struggle with every single sentence. But what I do is I take the massive thing, and then I try to make every sentence perfect, write it beautifully, and then I cut down almost half the novel. I mean, that's not energy efficient. So I'm really telling myself next time, cut what needs to be cut before working and making sure, every sentence I'm happy with, because that takes a lot of work to do that. And then it's heartbreaking when you have these passages where I think, okay, that was beautifully written and it took me so long, but it's got to go.
Yeah, I see the dilemma there. And you mentioned your own children earlier. How do you, growing up, early on, I guess this is even more of advice, Christine, how do you teach to them the importance of reading and writing early on? I mean, how do you, as an author, how do you teach your own children the importance? Like we talked, earlier, you and I, about the importance of letter writing. It's like I don't want to say a lost art, but that's kind of what it is. How did you teach the importance of reading and writing to your children?
Okay, this is probably going to seem a little bit draconian.
Okay.
But when they were young, I realized quite quickly that the kids who had devices and things would stop reading because it provided a lot of imagination for them. And I realized that with one of the schools here in New Zealand, which I immediately pulled them out, they wanted them to have in middle school a device. But I quickly noticed that something that we had always enjoyed, an activity as a family, then my son wasn't present because he wanted just to be back at his device. Well, I got rid of that thing like it was the plague. And then after they were just enjoying reading, and we would have moments where we just have reading evening, and we'd each get a book and we go to the library regularly, and I'd have all kinds of games to develop their own imagination to such an extent now, when, through high school they would have to have devices, they weren't tempted to go on videos anymore because their imagination had built through other things, through music, through reading books, and they found some of these things just a bit silly and a waste of time. But it was those very important formative years where the device was just too dangerous. I found too dangerous to take away maybe the fact that they would still want to do other things. It seemed to me that there was something almost addictive with it, and that's what frightened me. This said, there is a lot of good also that they learned online, and there are a lot of practical things. So, for example, I have one son who likes to play chess, and luckily he's able to do some of that online and play with other people in the United States or Russia or other things, which he might not have, the opportunity nearby to find other players. So there is a lot of good, but I think it's very important that they love reading before they get to learn, to start clicking things. Otherwise they become more visual.
Oh, I love that. I think that's music to a lot of people's ears, and I have to say, so another fascinating part of your life is the research. And I want to get into your research, especially for a lot of your work. But specifically, I want to get into the woman you met in Paris that kind of gets us started on the journey. Talk a little bit about Caging Skies. So my mother's side of the family is from Poland, and my mother's grandfather had a story, cut it short, that he basically helped a lot of Jews in Poland at the threat of having an entire village burned down. And it reminded me when I read the story about how you kind of came into, Caging Skies here. In Paris, you became friends with an elderly French woman whose parents hid a Jewish man during the war. Just elaborate, Christine, a little bit on that. And because I really want to talk about this, what is truly a work of art in Caging Skies, and this rapport and this relationship you had with this elderly French woman.
Yeah, so I became friends with this lovely woman, and after I knew her maybe about a year, maybe more, one day she told me the story, because she'd been married twice, but she told me the story of her first husband. And she told me that her parents had hidden a man, and so a Polish Jewish refugee to France, and he was behind a wall in their home. And she was then in her late teens, and she began to just fall in love with him through speaking through a wall. And I thought that was such a powerful thing. Sadly, when they wanted to get married afterwards, her parents didn't accept that, which I found very sad, because they almost wanted to disown her at the time, which I found incredibly sad. And then sadder yet was the fact that because he'd lost so many family and friends and he had terrible survivor guilt, the marriage didn't last. And it was actually with the Polish cleaning women. He had an affair, and then they ended up marrying. And I thought to myself, maybe he could feel that this woman who had hardship, he just felt closer than maybe the more privileged life, that his wife had. And it was just very sad. But that remains in my mind a long time when I was looking for a second story, because the theme was very strong of having someone in your home that you're protecting, yet in some way they're in prison. And it was just, and at the same time, to me, this was too profound what had happened to make it into a romance, because though there is love involved, love is just one of the many things that's involved in a story like that, and a tragedy, what happened to the Jews during the war and what they had to go through, and, losing everything. So when suddenly I thought to myself, let's not make it the woman who finds the man. Let's switch it around and make the Jewish person a young woman. And why don't I make then the person whose family's hiding her someone in the Hitler Youth? And then I thought, there we go, because now I can actually go and say, how did this happen? How did they take, normal children? Because the kids before they were in the Hitler Youth, they were just kids, playing fields, playing with their kites, doing what all other kids do. They were in the Scouts. And I thought, how do you take that and then suddenly turn them into, Hitler's weapon? And that was something I wanted to research and try to explore, to understand how Germany, a country at the time, which was had great universities and artists and everything, how could a country like that turn so fast into, people who suddenly saw themselves superior to other races and felt that they were entitled, to just exterminate other people.
Yeah, and for those listening, we're going to go into Christine's book, Caging Skies, which was made into Jojo Rabbit. Incredible and powerful book released in 2008. How impressive is it to you, Christine, that your own book was translated, and I want to say it's got to be over 20 languages at this point, right?
Yes,
wow.
It is. I find that incredible, and I find it extremely moving. The one thing I do find troubling is that a lot of the countries who took it, even before it became a film, started to be countries where they were having a rise in the far right. And that I found troubling, because when I wrote it, I just wrote it as something so people never forget, so they just, take aware. I didn't want the world to start, taking a turn so suddenly this becomes relevant. But I do find it moving that places, even like Korea or Turkey or places like that, that they fully understand what's going on and that they can relate to what's happening. China took it and Russia took it. And so I have these copies of books, where I can't even read the characters. But that's to think that the story has something universal that resonates with people. I definitely do think that it's important that people read that and try to understand how quickly something can actually happen when people are frightened, when things get a bit hard because of the economy, how things can take such a radical turn, towards the mob, towards the worst, and how people know how to prey on that fear and to turn that fear into anger.
Yeah, and for those listening, the book is an amazing story in itself. The movie is one of my all-time favorites, and Taika is a very respected, one of our best filmmakers, Watiti. He has Caging Skies recommended to him by his mother, who is Jewish, and she absolutely loves it. He sinks his teeth into it. He loves it as well. When he contacts you, Christine, initially, how does that meeting go? How did that first meeting take place?
So, he contacted me and we met in Wellington. So I traveled, I took a train to go see him and likewise. And when we met each other, my PhD supervisor very kindly let me have his office at the time. And he had a lovely view of the sea, in Wellington. And Taika was so funny. He walked in. He looks at the view of the sea, sits back in my supervisor's desk, and he puts his 2 feet on the desk and his hands behind his, head like, I gives a sigh. So he was funny from the beginning. And we were very pleased when we met each other because I was a little bit apprehensive. I thought maybe this is the filmmaker who, has a big head. And he thought, oh, no, this is, somebody coming from Europe. She might be the author, And we just found 2 very normal people who were excited to make this happen. What I find incredible is that when Taika told me what he wanted to do with the film when we met, ended up being just what he did. So his first vision of the film, that was it. And actually, I agreed with him what he had done, because he told me if he were to do the whole book, it would have to be a series, and he'd have to do, 12, 15 series, a TV series or something. He wanted to do a feature film, so we knew it had to be cut someplace.
Right.
And so when he talked about the right place to end it, I won't give any spoilers, I agreed that was the right place, that took as much of the story that was necessary and then stopped there. The book continues further than where the film does. But I think that the film, to be a feature, it stops, really at the place that was necessary to. So we know that, they've lost the war. We know the consequences of that. But at the same time, it doesn't carry on beyond that.
Yeah, and the lead character in the book, and I don't want to give that away either, but yeah, you're right. The ending kind of is a bit different. I have to say, so it's amazing. You and Taika could not be 2 different types of storytellers, but yet your messages in the end are very similar. It's amazing how the 2 of you kind of do your own thing in your own way, and then at the end we arrive at kind of like the same ending, very powerful, very moving. Is that a effective way of looking at that, Christine?
Yeah, that is exactly how I felt. So I felt we saw eye to eye, and what I tried to say through the book in a more literary way, he was through film with his own take trying to say it in his own way, but I felt it was a good match, and I didn't want to make him do something that was a replica of the book, because I always said to him, the book is mine. The book will always stay the way it is. But I wanted his film to have his signature, which is a very distinct signature. So I always said it's almost as if I did a classical painting and he made a Picasso out of it, but the message was the same, So it was same yet different, and yet so many films I find where they try to do the books very closely end up being a little bit tedious and long, and they don't capture the essence of the book. So sometimes when you're too faithful to the book, oddly enough, you lose the essence of the book.